I'm going to do two parts. The first part, I will provide an overview of what AIMS is all about, and I'm not going to go into the contextualizing of the study or the research or AIMS, but I will try to focus more on the way we operationalize this whole idea, initiative that we call AIMS, and how from AIMS we are moving into the theoretical research as well as the empirical research. So I will give that overview at the beginning, pretending to be Dr. Ahmed Alwani. He's much more talkative than me, but I'll try my best to present the ideas that he would have been presenting here. So a lot of people use the word AIMS, and we have been using it in IIIT as an initiative, a project. But we want to put more into that. We want to also say that advancing education in Muslim societies is also a goal, a future outcome, as well as a pathway and probably a framework. And that's where we've been working to try to define what do we really mean by advancing education in Muslim societies. And from the pathway, get to the goals and get to the outcomes we're trying to achieve, as well as put a conceptual framework that would help us understand if we go this route of empirical research, what would it mean for us as educators, as people involved, as people who care about what happens in the education sphere in Muslim societies. So the first thing I would like to show you is what we came up with as a vision and mission of AIMS. And if you look at the vision and mission, we are actually looking at education in a broader sense. We are looking to achieve thriving Muslim societies where individuals achieve their fullest potential. And you can see that on the screen. I'm not going to read through it. But just to emphasize that thriving Muslim societies is a big word as well, and it's part of our vision, because thriving is not just the individual, it's the community, it's the school systems, as well as policymakers and states and so forth. So it's a big, ambitious initiative, a big, ambitious goal that we have through AIMS. As my colleague earlier mentioned, IIIT has been focusing on higher education. With this AIMS initiative, like one of the doctors before me said, we start at birth. We start early, so we're including schooling, we're including the pre-K to 12 schooling and education in this whole idea of AIMS as well. And we're also looking at empirical research that is grounded and in partnership with local partners in the countries we are conducted the studies at, and in the countries where IIIT has already established contacts and had already established affiliations. We are trying to come up with data-driven recommendations, programming, interventions, curriculum, where we can actually say scientifically, from the social science perspective, whether it's Western or non-Western, but we're trying to say that here we have some evidence for why we need to do so and so, and that we have some strategy that we can strategize and plan with the different entities, the different countries, different stakeholders we work with. We're also looking at the research component, where we are also interested in developing measures that are sensitive to the context, that respond to the needs, and that can actually help us identify where are the gaps in research, and not just where are the crises, but also where are the successes, and where are these hopeful points that we can build on in our views on through AIMS. And I would like to quickly frame this whole idea of AIMS in what we call the third space. And if you say the third space, you probably assume there is a first space and second space. In the first space, what we're looking at is education through, or education towards employability, right? A lot of international organizations invest in countries, whether they are Muslim majority or what we call in the South, invest money in these programs because we are trying to improve lives in order to improve employability, economic conditions, getting people out of poverty. In the second space, we are actually investing in what's called citizenship education. And there's a lot of money that's been done and put into these kinds of projects as well. What we would like to offer is a complementary approach, which we call the third space. That does not mean that the first space and second space are not important. But what we're saying is that our uniqueness comes from this approach that we call the third space, where we're looking at the whole person, where we're looking at education not only as a way to transmit knowledge and skills, but also as a meaningful way of life, right? It's a broad way of looking at the religious, spiritual growth, moral growth, values, and as well as cognitive and emotional growth. These are all important pieces in this holistic approach to education. Lots of data is out there. If you look at all the international studies, you will see lots of data on, student outputs, enrollment, dropouts, what's happening in between, especially looking at achievement on international assessments like the Program in International Student Achievement, the PISA. And if we look at those, anyone who looks at this, and especially educators, it's really, really very discouraging, because we see that most of the countries we are representing here and most of the places we're interested in are not on that list of the PISA scores, but they're also, if they're there, they're very, very low on the achievement score among other countries. So what happens while we're investing all this money, we're not seeing results. And what we're trying to say is, in our approach, we'd like to include these kinds of aspects: academic achievement, citizenship, democracy, but we also would like to look at the socio-emotional aspects of growth. So AIMS has two different parts in terms of the research. The empirical research, which is the mapping the terrain study that I will talk about later, but we also have the theoretical research that has been going on at IIIT and their partners, and Dr. Beddi will speak about that. The approach we take in terms of the conceptual framework, it might look a little bit too complex, but I think it's simple. One, we see education, like I said, as a broad initiative, education in its broadest sense. Two, in order to look at transformation and initiate transformation, we adopt the 3 H's model, what's called the head, heart, and hands. The aql, al-fu'ad, al-amal. Okay, it's not enough to provide information. It's not enough to work on the emotional aspects of learning and education. It's also how do we impact amal and doing. So in order to empower people to change, you have to actually work on these 3 levels. What we add to that is the human development aspect. And in the human development aspect, we actually adopted this model that is called the spiral dynamic model. What's unique about this model is that it allows people to move back and forth on that model, on that trajectory of growth. Also, it describes states of consciousness rather than stages of development. I don't know, those of you who are in the room might relate to this, because lots of the theories in human development actually look at people as moving from one stage in infancy to the next, to get to maturity. While in the spiral dynamic model, life conditions can actually move people back and forth. And I'll explain that. In the model, you can start with the very basic needs and achieving those basic needs by being very much instinctive, right? You need to find food, shelter, drink, and all, to survive. These survival instinctive factors are at play in development. While as you move up in life and as you move up in your life conditions might change and you get into the egocentric stage. I always give the example of myself being Palestinian. I'm always egocentric in looking at Palestine before I look at anything else. But after I went to the US and I lived for 30 years and learned that there is so much misery in the world and so much other stuff that's going on, Palestine is not the center of the world. That's where I could, I was able to move from this egocentric stage to higher ones. I don't know if I got to the holistic, but I'm trying my best to move beyond the egocentric, and all of us actually work on these kinds of states of consciousness. What we added to the model is this 9th stage that we call Tawheed. A lot of these models are secular models that shy away from religious aspects, from spiritual aspects of growth, and we put it right there as the highest consciousness, the highest state of consciousness, with a definition of Tawheed not only as oneness with God, but oneness with the universe, oneness with others, and this whole larger entity, larger force that is out there and is important for Muslims, but also for others as well. In mapping the terrain, which I will talk about later, the research and this wave one of mapping the terrain, we took this whole approach to values, this approach to social emotional learning, and we tried to translate it into actual research, empirical research. We utilized subscales that I will share with you later, but we were very, very conscious of their sensitivity to the Muslim context, to the cultures, and to the socio-political conditions in each of those countries we work with. Some of the constructs that we will be exploring later on, and our colleagues from the different countries will be presenting on tomorrow, are, if you look at the wave one, it actually brings the constructs into this conceptual framework that I just described, and we will be focusing on constructs like empathy, forgiveness, moral reasoning, community-mindedness, self-efficacy, sense of belonging, religiosity. It's a lot of constructs all together, and it's, but they're all interrelated. They're all interrelated because they bring this whole socio-emotional and the well-being agenda we have, because that's our ultimate outcome, is the well-being agenda. So we're looking at these aspects as a socio-emotional aspects, and we did the pilot to be examining these constructs in the different places, keeping in mind that it's not just the individual we're concerned with, we're also concerned with the collective, because it's a very important component in many of the societies we work with. And I think a lot of the studies we see in the West miss that component and stay within this whole individualistic approach to growth, to education, and to research. This is the reason why we have community-mindedness. In fact, community-mindedness was one of those constructs that we haven't seen a lot of research on. And we're trying to, start a research agenda that can take community-mindedness into consideration. We also included values that are important, such as, for Muslims, such as forgiveness, empathy, moral reasoning. These are very important values-based, but what we did, we operationalized those into measurable constructs in our study. Do I have time?
3 more minutes.
3 more minutes. Okay. These are the definitions of the different constructs, and you can find them in your background paper that we distributed to you earlier. I'm not going to go into them because I only have 2 more minutes, but let's just briefly address the so what. When we launched the study in July, we had a lot of discussions with the different people, and some of you were there in July in Istanbul, and we were talking about the so what. Well, there are several so what. One is that we are establishing a research agenda. That's a very important fact. 2, we are looking for what is happening that is actually also hopeful, and not just from the deficit model of the crisis, and let's deal with the crisis, let's diagnose it, and then we don't do anything. We cannot go beyond that. We're saying let's go and collect empirical data, and let's see what can we do with this data to inform how we diagnose, to inform how we can actually start initiatives, empower initiatives that are of value, but also have impact. And that's where we're trying to go with this whole well-being agenda. We also know that if we work on the well-being of students, learners, parents, and communities, we will actually impact academic achievement. This we have seen in multiple studies in different places where they've shown evidence that if you take care of the socio-emotional aspects of growth, you are also empowering students and learners to do better in academic achievement. We also know from research that people who are much well-rounded have better citizenship skills and community practices. And then the sense of belonging, which is an interesting component construct that we'll hear about in the different presentations, is also very interesting. How does feeling belonging to your country, to your community, to your faith, how does that really correlate with academic achievement and to your belonging to your community and to your school, to your workplace, and so forth? No need to go into outputs. We're trying to publish our work, present it to people, and we'll do more of that as we move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.